All right, so it's 5:03, so I think we should get started with the event. My name is Kevin Purcell. I'm currently an adult reconstruction fellow at Duke University, also the chair of the Gladden Society social media. So on behalf of the Gladden Society, After Mentions, BWOS, and Estimate OSIG, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. As you can see from the slides, we have a lot of great events planned for this year, such as the resident distress, family planning, and the RT prep, which we're going from July to November. So, quick history about Black History Month. Black History Month was founded in 1926 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. It was started as Negro Achievement Week or Negro History Week. In 1970, a couple students in Northeast Ohio, at Kent State University, rallied to have this change to Black History Month. So the week, which then turned to the month, has always been about highlighting the achievements of people of the African diaspora. And as you can see from the panelists and the moderator here, we have a lot of people who've done a lot of great things in their own community, but also in the field of orthopedics. So I'd like to take this time to introduce our moderator, Dr. Robert Wilson, Program Director of Orthopedic Surgery at Howard University College of Medicine, to go ahead and run the event. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to respectfully honor our pioneers in orthopedics. And it's funny, I'm very lucky to be in this position, obviously, but I've known everyone who's being honored for over 30 years, and everyone has had some influence on me personally, provided some guidance. For example, Dr. Parker has advised me when to shut up. So I know I'm going to try to keep that in mind and leave most of the speaking to those who are being honored today. I'm going to read some introductions for each of those folks who are the honorees for today, and very much appreciate to do this. First, I'll mention Dr. Alvin Crawford. Dr. Crawford was the first African-American to graduate from UTHSC College of Medicine in 1964. Since then, he and his wife have established the Alvin H. and Alva J. Crawford Endowed Medical Scholarship for those medical students. He has been recognized as an AOA pillar of the orthopedic profession and is one of the nation's frontrunners in video-assisted thoracoscopic surgery. He has received multiple honorary doctorates and lifetime achievement awards, and is also the founder of Black Men in Medicine in Cincinnati. Moreover, he's a retired U.S. Naval captain and accomplished clarinetist. Dr. Crawford, we celebrate you and we honor the lasting impact that you've had. Thank you. The next honoree, I don't see you here, but on the screen, but Dr. Claudia Thomas, first Black female orthopedic surgeon in the United States. She attended Johns Hopkins for medical school, after which she was a pillar in helping recruit the largest number of minority orthopedic trainees at Hopkins. She then went on to become the first woman and the first African-American to graduate from the Yale residency. I think first woman to graduate from the Yale residency. Moreover, she is the recipient of many awards and honors, and most notably the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons Diversity Award, and is also a cancer survivor. And she details this in other events in the autobiography entitled God Spare Life. Dr. Thomas, today we thank you for your mentorship, and we honor the inspirational trail that you have blazed in orthopedics, especially for aspiring Black women in the field. Dr. Augustus A. White was the first Black graduate from Stanford School of Medicine in 1961, the first Black surgical resident, then professor of medicine at Yale, and then went on to become the first Black department chair at Harvard-affiliated Beth Israel Hospital, the BI. At Harvard Medical School, he was honored as the Ellen and Melvin Gordon Distinguished Professor of Medical Education. Additionally, Dr. White served as a captain in the U.S. Army Medical Corps in Vietnam, during which he earned a Bronze Star. He then obtained his PhD in biomechanics and has been awarded 8 additional honorary degrees throughout the course of his professional career. Moreover, Dr. White has been committed to advocating for equity and diversity in healthcare. He is co-founder of the J. Robert Gladden Society and served as the Diversity Committee's chairman for the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. He was later honored as an AAOS Diversity Award recipient as well, and has been recognized by the American Orthopaedic Association as an AOA pillar of the orthopedic profession. In 2021, Dr. White received the Humanitarian Award in recognition of his lifetime commitment to healthcare equity. Dr. White, we are truly honored to be able to thank you for the legacy you have established, and we honor your lasting impact that you have made in the field of orthopedics. Dr. Shrente Parker attended Brown University in Providence, where she majored in biology and medicine, followed by Howard University College of Medicine, Washington, D.C. She completed her internship in general surgery and Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago, where she's from. She then completed residency at Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C., and was my chief resident, and followed by a fellowship in hand and microvascular surgery at Ohio State Hospital and Riverside Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. In addition to her outstanding career as an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Parker believes that one of her greatest achievements has been practicing a lifestyle of servant leadership in various communities. Her service has been demonstrated through her gift for liturgical dance, active engagement with her sorority Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, and mentorship of students in the local Chicago charter schools, as well as GRACE or GRACE program at the at the Apostolic Church of God in Chicago. I need to go to church more. Dr. Parker is currently practicing at Jackson Park Hospital in Chicago, where my father-in-law served, where she serves as the division chief of orthopedic surgery and past medical staff president. She sees patients in clinic. She performs surgeries. She overall served as an administrator. Dr. Parker, we are truly honored to be able to thank you for the legacy you have established, and we honor the lasting impact that you have made in the field of orthopedics. Dr. Randall Morgan. Dr. Morgan received his doctorate from Howard University College of Medicine and then completed his orthopedic surgery residency at Northwestern University, subsequently completing a fellowship in pediatric orthopedic surgery at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Dr. Morgan is currently president and CEO of the Montague Cobb NMA Health Institute. With the assistance of his father, Mr. Randall C. Morgan, he was able to found the Orthopedic Centers of Northwest Indiana and served as its president from 1975 to 1999. At one time, he had the largest minority-owned orthopedic practice in the United States that also had Howard residency graduates in it. He has published extensively throughout his career in orthopedics, social responsibility, health equity, and the education pipeline for underrepresented young scholars. He is a diplomat of the ABOS and the American Board of Managed Care Medicine. He is also a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and a member of the AOA Honorary Medical Society. Lastly, Dr. Edward A. Rankin. Dr. Rankin was the first Black president of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons in 2008. During his presidency, he focused on enhancing advocacy, unity, and diversity for the organization. Prior to his tenure, Dr. Rankin spent decades as one of the preeminent teachers of young orthopedic surgeons of color. Briefly, his orthopedic training began in Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Afterwards, he joined Dr. Charles H. Epps Jr. as faculty at Howard University. His practice flourished at Providence Hospital, and while he built one of the most respected practices in the DC metro area, he also served tirelessly in the orthopedic community as president of multiple organizations, including the Washington Orthopedic Society, the Eastern Orthopedic Association, and culminating with the AAOS. And despite these accomplishments, Dr. Rankin is best known for his mentorship of residents and students. And to his orthopedic children, he has been and always will be known as Big Daddy. Thank you very much. Those are all of our honorees. And I think the first question we would ask for everyone is, first, how did you get interested in orthopedics, and what has been your journey into medicine? At least at those with those days where we had black and white television.
Hey, Dr. Wilson, I think your volume's going in and out. I don't know if something's wrong with your computer.
Okay, you know what it is? I don't know what it is, but it's something about my um uh the I have to change my the microphone, but we can proceed. What I would
Yeah, it
can you
sounds
hear
good
me?
now. It sounds good now. Yeah. Just
Okay,
stay close.
I'll stay close. I was I I was going to ask first Dr. Parker to speak, since she's the one that's younger than me, to speak about what her journey has been into medicine and how she chose orthopedics.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, also known as Bob White. First, I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me to participate in this panel with these distinguished orthopedic surgeons. Every one of them has inspired me in one way or the other. Dr. White, with all of his accomplishments, his first thing that he did, he went to Brown University as well for his undergraduate degree, so we share that in common. And then Dr. Rankin was my first attending in orthopedic surgery for 6 months at Providence Hospital in 1989. And I've also had much contact with Dr. Morgan, Dr. Crawford, and so it's definitely a privilege to be a part of this panel, and I thank you for the invitation. As far as my journey into medicine and then subsequently into orthopedic surgery, it wasn't, nowadays, everything seems to be so orchestrated and planned out. And for me, it wasn't, like that. I was interested in science. I love science. And so I took a lot of science classes at Brown. I had to figure out a major. So I chose biology and medicine. And then I had to, college goes really fast when you're having fun. And I had to kind of figure out what was next. And so I decided to go to medical school. While in medical school, I did well. I was academically excellent. And early on, probably after the first semester of medical school, I was pulled by the dean, and I was told that if I kept up the academic excellence, I could do anything I wanted to do in medicine. I had no idea what I wanted to do. There was a running joke in my house. I lived with another medical student and 2 law students that, so Cerinthia, we would watch football on Sundays. You could be that doctor who takes care of the athletes. And I always liked athletes. I was a cheerleader all through Brown. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. But it didn't really gel what that really meant. So as I continue to, excel in medical school, then I got to the clinical years, did psych, not for me, peds, not for me. Finally, I did the surgical rotation, and it was clear immediately that I was intended to be a surgeon, athletes, orthopedic surgery, no brainer. So once I finally started to speak that out, everyone, including the dean who told me I could do anything I wanted to with these excellent grades, tried to steer me in a different direction. Like orthopedic surgery, you can't do that, but maybe you could do this. And so when you tell me what I can't do, then that's what I'm going to do. And so that's how I ended up saying, you're not going to, tell me that I can't be an orthopedic surgeon. I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon. Clueless really as to what that meant. But once I made that decision, I started to figure out what it was all about in terms of the areas of, that it was more than just taking care of, football players. It was, children and old people. My grandfather had a hip fracture. So I understood what it all meant. And that's how I ended up pursuing and then eventually getting into the orthopedic surgery program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy you did, because you were obviously an excellent chief, and again kept me handcuffed at times when I needed to be. Next, I'd like to I'd go back in time and ask, let's see, Dr. Morgan, how did you end up getting into orthopedic surgery? I know I'll just very briefly, we met, you probably will not remember the first day we met, but we met at a wedding because I was trying to get in orthopedics, and someone said, I think the guy in the band He's an orthopedic surgeon. He was up there singing Brick House, and I got to meet you at the wedding in Chicago. But please, sir, tell us, how did you get started?
Well, first of all, the question is, were you able to learn Brick House, and did that help you get into orthopedics?
Yes, sir.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and it is my distinct pleasure to share a bit of time with you today. I'm glad I was on time. I had grandfather duty today with the dance recital, but everything worked out well so that I could be on time. This is kind of a no-brainer discussion in that I know everyone on the panel very well, including Cerinthia, and she's practicing and doing such a great job in my favorite city. That is, pre 60 years of age when I could handle any temperature. But I had an unusual introduction to orthopedics. I'm one of those Black males that grew up in a community that was de facto segregated. And it was de facto segregated in a very positive way because we had all kinds of Black males as mentors, along with Black females and teachers as well. But my dad owned 2 drugstores in the community. And so as I worked in the community, I met all the doctors that were in the community, one of which was Dr. Richard Grant's dad. And so I had people like that around me all the time. And my only question was whether I would go into pharmacy or whether I would go into medicine. But I realized probably about the time I was in 10th grade that my dad's hours were too long in pharmacy, and I didn't think there was the reward. So when I was in 11th grade, a very important thing happened. I was introduced to an orthopedic surgeon that moved into town, came from Colorado. He was the first African-American to graduate from, second African-American to graduate from the University of Arkansas Medical School, Dr. Bill Mott. And Dr. Mott came to Gary because he was there with Jackie Shropshire, who was a prominent attorney in town, and Jackie was the first graduate from University of Arkansas Law School. So they decided that they would have a medical legal practice in Gary. And I literally met Dr. Mott as he was moving in. I helped him set up his office. And I think I was in 11th grade. And so he showed me everything about orthopedics. And after I met him, he just said, "This is what you want to do." And I hadn't really decided I wanted to be a doctor for sure. But after working with him and then spending time at the National Science Foundation at Indiana University the following summer, it was clear that I wanted to go to medical school. And then I began to meet all these outstanding orthopedic surgeons, and some of whom are on the screen. It was a natural for me. And I guess I'm fortunate that I was successful in getting into orthopedics because I always wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And the mentoring that I got at an early age, including when I was in medical school with general surgeons in town in Gary, who taught me how to operate and how to be comfortable in the operating room long before I became an orthopedic resident, really made the difference. So I think I didn't just meander into orthopedics. I think it was divine intervention from some of our early J. Robert Gladden Orthopedic Society leaders.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? Because I know I'm going in and out, but hopefully you can hear me, Dr. Morgan. Thank you very much. Dr. White, again, my first time meeting Dr. White, he just can't remember, but it was in his office at the Beth Israel Medical Center when I was a young, I think a 3rd-year medical student at Harvard. Dr. White, what got you interested in orthopedics?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you so very much for the opportunity to be enriched by this program. And by that, I thank you and all of the participants. It's a real joy to be able to celebrate in this way and reminisce and share our experiences in a way that will hopefully be enjoyable. How did I get into orthopedics? I guess I always wanted to quote unquote be a doctor. And oftentimes that was pointed out to me by my home environment and my parents and friends and so forth. My dad was a primary care doctor in Memphis, Tennessee. So the doctor part just kind of was all part of it, I guess, part of being, as if you will. What about orthopedics? Well, actually, initially, I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And I was sincerely thinking that and working hard as an undergraduate, majoring in psychology and wanting to know and learn as much as I could about psychology. And I'm glad for that. But as it turned out, when I got into medical school, basically two things happened. One was that I was assigned on a general rotation. And I finally, as a medical student, second year medical student, I finally got a patient. I have to go, I get to go work up a patient. And it was a psychiatric patient. And I went, they said, well, she's out on the lawn there, and you can go and introduce yourself and you become working on your first patient, as it were. So I went with tremendous enthusiasm. And I went and I sat down next to this lady. She happened to be an African-American lady. And I sat down with her and I said, oh, I'm Augustus Wilder medical student, and I'm going to be your doctor. And I was just going on and on. I'm going to look after you. And it was just like a total blank. It's like I was not even there. And I thought, okay, well, this ain't for me, you know. I need a little more feedback. So meanwhile, things evolved and I went on through medical school. And as I began to go through my rotations, I kind of liked the orthopedic guys. You know, I resonated with them. I felt comfortable with them. And I also developed a secondary interest in surgery. So you connect those two dots and there I am aspiring to be an orthopedic surgeon, starting, I would say, in my second year or so in medical school, and then meeting a number of orthopedic surgeons whom I liked and with whom I resonated. And of course, there's this common interest of athletics, which does present itself, as has already been mentioned by one of our other presenters. So it seemed like a natural, you know, sports medicine, athletes, orthopedic surgery. And I also realized that I could still engage in a little bit of attempt to be a psychiatric doctor when my low back patients came in to see me. So that's sort of my story, and it's a pleasure to share it with you all.
Yeah, there's a lot of psych. Well, Dr. Crawford, and he's heard this probably from many different people. You know, one of the things in training, there were slides on pediatrics, and I would love to see the slides because they have these brown hands in the slide. And I'm like, wow, that meant a lot to me as a young resident in orthopedics, to have these teaching slides with these brown hands showing all these pediatric problems. So Dr. Crawford, how did you get interested into orthopedics?
Well, first of all, I was never, ever interested in medicine. Actually, since the sixth grade, I wanted to be a studio musician and nothing else in life. And I got a music scholarship to Tennessee State, and I thought I was doing very well. I played at a jazz club at Price's, and my brother was there. My brother was the big man on campus, and he was a senior. And he said, well, what do you think? You sound pretty good. I said, well, you know, I don't know whether I could be a studio musician. They're much, much better. He said, have you ever thought of anything else? I said, not really. I've been in music since sixth grade, and it was a sophomore college student. He said, well, you've always liked challenges. What do you think about medicine? I said, not anything really. And so he said, well, you might want to think about it. And I started thinking about it, and I found out something I never knew. I never knew that you didn't have to be a major in biology or medical sciences to get into medical school. The only thing you needed was to pass the prerequisites and the MCAT. And there was a time when medicine was trying to find another doctor, meaning that, doctors were, as somebody had mentioned, we would call them geeks or nerds or people who'd wanted to be doctors since they were 3 years old. And so they changed the exam, to make a long story short. When you're taking the MCAT, you never know what the person has beside you or whatever. So lo and behold, I was a music major, and they put a fine arts test on my table. And after that, things got sort of easy. So anyway, I started into medicine at Meharry, and my mother was a nurse in Memphis. And in Memphis, the University of Tennessee had said there would not be an African American. We were sort of Black in some other words then. That time they would ever attend the University of Tennessee. And so I was good. And there was a fellow, William Spate, I'll never forget him. He was an ENT surgeon there with her at the E.H. Crump Hospital, and said, Irma, can we use your son's grades? And she said, well, yes. He said, Meharry's doing really well, and we mortgaged the house. And so she didn't want any change in that. So I thought about it, and she said, Alvin, what do you think? You've always wanted challenges. I said, yes, I think I could do it. She said, well, if you really want to, give it a shot. You could live at home or whatever. And she was a nurse at E.H. Crump, and there was this extern there. And she said, if you go into medicine, as smart as you're supposed to be, you could be like Dr. White. I said, what? She said, Dr. Augustus White, he's an extern at Crump Hospital, and all the women like him, and he's doing well. I said, the one thing I don't want to be, he'd been a lifeguard at the swimming pool in Memphis for years. The one thing I don't want to be is a Gus White. So I got into medicine. That's another long story, too long for this. But I knew that, I think medical students have to decide whether or not they want to medicate, to consult, or to cut to cure. I decided I wanted to cut to cure. I thought I wanted to be a general surgeon, but boy, a general surgeon is sort of tough. But the orthopedic surgeons were just laid back. They had a good time. And I said, well, I think I'd like to be one of those guys. So I ended up going into orthopedics. And then I was in Southeast Asia when I went out to Vietnam, and I was on an AR, which is a repair ship. And I took care of so many fingers and elbows and arms and everything else that I thought that. But then life changed. When I got into residency, I had a pediatric rotation, Boston Children, and it was unbelievable. I literally fell in love with children. I knew exactly where in an adult, what's their goal? Is it a disability kid? Is it an off-work kid? It may be a lot. The children are so straightforward. The only thing they want to do is to get better so they can play with their friends. If you can get that, then you are it. And so at that time, I was trapped. They had me. I had them, but they didn't realize they had me. And since then, I've never thought about it since. I've really, and you can see them go ahead of them. And they called me 25 years after surgery this morning. And it's you're there for life. So I can say I decided to go into pediatric orthopedics. And then the spine attracted me. And she said, I told you should be like Dr. White. And so so it didn't stop, but I ended up still with my music. I'm an assistant at the College Conservatory of Music now in jazz history, and enjoying that and playing several bands. And it's good, enjoying it all. I think the right decision was made for me, and I'm right in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I used to love children too, and then I had 6, and everything changed. But thank you, Dr. Crawford. Really, thank you. And I guess Dr. Rankin, you came around in the similar time, same area of the country. How did you end up getting interested in orthopedic surgery?
Thank you, and let me say congratulations to all of the honorees here, and to the attendees as well. This is a real pleasure, as everyone has said. So unlike Randy Morgan, who grew up in de facto segregation, I grew up in Mississippi in facto segregation. Right down the street from Memphis, from my two colleagues that I'll relate my meeting with them. In fact, well, I'll get to that in a moment. But I had a favorite aunt who I think planted the seed of medicine in my brain early on. There was one Black doctor in my town who was a Howard graduate, and he was a well-liked and well-respected doctor, and I actually went to him a couple of times. So I went to college, and first of all, I left Mississippi to go to college, and I went to college knowing I probably didn't want to go back to Mississippi. I was interested in medicine early on, and I had an uncle, a favorite uncle, who made a career, left Mississippi and made a career out of the military. He was a regular Army, got to be a colonel. So I had a plan B. If I didn't get in medicine, I was going to be a general in the Army. So I took four years of college ROTC and got a deferment to go to medical school. So I got interested. Actually, at Meharry, there was a Black orthopedic surgeon, Wallace Dooley, who had graduated from the Iowa program some years earlier, and I got an interest early on with him, but it wasn't submitted. But I knew surgery was what I liked. But in any event, with the Army, I was given a deferment to go to medical school and brought back on active duty after my second year, do a clerkship, and I was assigned to the Letterman Army Hospital, the Presidio in San Francisco, and had a month of medicine, a month of surgery. My month of surgery, fortunately, was orthopedics. I don't think I requested it, but I got it. And they had an amazing teacher. The chairman of orthopedics was a Colonel McBurney. And the orthopedic residents were just great. I mean, they loved what they were doing. It was really just quite involved educationally. And they just took me right in. It was just a great month. So I was pretty certain that I did want to do orthopedics from that point forward. But like Alvin, I was looking at general surgery as well. And I mentioned Alvin. Alvin was at Meharry one semester, and somehow I was fortunate to get his what we call rocks, which were the old exams. And this man's exams were perfect. So I had a roadmap. So later, when I did get into orthopedics with Walter Reed, I met Gus through John Fagan, who was a good friend of Gus's, and Gus is ahead of me about 4 years, but I met him through Fagan. And that basically, I think the Army is probably the main reason that I got into orthopedic surgery through my exposure out at Letterman Hospital. Since we're getting late in the hour, I'll bring it to a close at that point. But it's been a great choice, and we have some great people to look up to who are here on this panel. Randy was my wife's classmate at Howard, so I think I talked to him about orthopedics a little bit over the years as well.
Absolutely.
Well, so I'll try to move quickly through this. I got one question for Dr. I'll ask Dr. White. How have you seen diversity in orthopedics change since when you first started?
Well, I hope I'm not trying to be a sociologist, intellectual, or anything like that, but I would say to a large degree, it reflected the current status of race relations, diversity and inclusion that was prevailing in our country, in our nation, was in a similar fashion, I think, reflected in orthopedics. We as African Americans were extremely rare in the professions, and it was like a believe it or not element, and that was the way it went, and people knew people who knew people. And there was clearly segregation and discrimination and racism alive and well in and about the profession, and all of the unfortunate things that were brought out so loudly and clearly later on as we began to take the cloaks off a little bit, the secrets off, and look more realistically at the history of racism in our country. We found all those same things reflected to varying degrees in orthopedics, if not more so. And I'm not sure about that, but it'd be interesting to study that. As you well know, there's information going around that orthopedics is a whitish specialty and presumably one of the most challenging, difficult ones to have equitable care, humane care for our patients, and fair care for our trainees and our medical students. So I would say that my experience is no different than anyone else's. I experienced the fallout of these racial realities as they evolve in our country, and as all the people on this call in one way or another are working on and inspired by and committed to. And that's the way we're going to make progress. And we have made progress, and I believe we will make progress. So that's sort of, let's continue to share our thoughts and ideas amongst each other, amongst ourselves, and let's recognize that we not only want to survive these racial realities, but we want to thrive even in these racial realities. And we want to encourage our friends and colleagues and allies to do the right thing and to try to move in that direction. That's what I think this program is contributing to and will contribute to in the future as others listen to it. And that's one of the reasons I'm so enthusiastic and proud and happy to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. And there was a question that's on the one of the, I think, students has asked, or residents, but I'll ask Dr. Crawford this question. What are some common characteristics that you see in successful students? And well, students, I'll leave it as successful students, those that you think are going to do well. What do you think they should have or carry with them in order to be successful for the future?
Looked into this quite a bit. Thanks for that question, because I'm involved with something now, BMIMC, which is Black Men in Medicine Cincinnati. And I think and you can sort of tell it, and that is the ability to listen, to not just hear, but to listen. I see those who have that quality as doing well, and I try to instill that. And it's altogether different. You can hear a lot of things, but to listen and to accept it and perceive it. And you know, in my boot camp now, and I have a boot camp. I won't even go into what that may or may not be. However, I think one of the things that I say is that listening, such things as listening to parents. And I give the analogy of a mother who's got a 7-year-old there that they called her in because it was hit by a car. They're sitting there in the emergency room. The resident says, well, what's his date of birth? And then comes out and say, God, she's as dumb as suppose she can't even remember. They don't realize that she's 28 years old. Her husband, she couldn't get at work. The lady who keeps her kids in the afternoon's not there. I mean, her brain is somewhere altogether different. But I think that if we can develop the art of listening, that is the resident to the patient, that's what I think the quality is. And I try to tell them, well, you know, God was into that, in that he gave you one mouth, but 2 ears. And so the ability to listen and to listen effectively will be very important. And that's the person that I think will do well. And not only in orthopedics, but pretty much any specialty.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question, I think it was Dr. Carson had a question, but I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. I'm going to ask Dr. Parker. The other folks in this panel, you know, they had maybe two people who have been mentors to them or sparked their interest in orthopedics. For you, who are the major people who you think have sparked your interest or helped you in your career when you think back on it in orthopedics? And are they people of color? And don't mention those who haven't.
Right, I won't. You know I won't. But yeah, they are people of color. I live near the fire station, so there's the fire truck. But first, I would say Dr. Charles Epps. He, when I was a medical student at Howard, he was the chairman of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery. And he was one of the ones who was trying to kind of steer me in a different direction. But he sat with me and we had a candid conversation, and he began to, you know, share about the different women that he knew who started orthopedics and didn't finish. So I asked him, I said, well, Dr. Epps, do you know any men who started and didn't finish? And then so then that guided the conversation. So Dr. Epps, and he also gave me the opportunity to become an orthopedic surgeon by giving me my place in the residency program without me filling out an application. So there's that. Then, of course, Dr. Grant, Richard Grant, who was my chairman of orthopedic surgery at Howard University. And he was just amazing. You know, I was in residency at a time when there weren't a lot of women in medicine, certainly not a lot of Black females, and many of them really had a challenging time in their programs. I mean, orthopedic surgery is hard, so it's going to be challenging regardless, but we didn't have that extra layer of challenge because people thought we were imposters and shouldn't be there, because Dr. Grant did not allow it. Now we were the best residents, of course, but he made sure that we stepped up and did our job, but he also made sure that people didn't dismiss us or demean us in any way or disrespect us. So Dr. Grant and Dr. Rankin, we kind of bumped heads early on, my first rotation. He probably doesn't remember, but I do. And but at the end of my residency, I think he was one of the strongest supporters of me. I still have the letter of recommendation that he wrote for me for my job and for my fellowship. And I always admired Dr. Rankin in the way that he practiced. So he did hand, but he also did joints and other things. And so my practice was very similar to Dr. Rankin's. Like, I did a hand surgery fellowship, but I don't stand out as a hand surgeon because I do everything else except spine. And so those three, I think, were the ones that primarily influenced me and have always supported me throughout my career.
Well, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Morgan, you had, I remember at the time when you had that large practice that was, I mean, mostly, people of color. And I'm trying to figure out, how did that happen? How did that kind of practice, we can have that at Howard, but it does, only a few other instances, it's been, I think there's been a group in Atlanta and a group in New Orleans, I think Baton Rouge, but like, how did that happen for you? And was it an advantage, or it just happened by happenstance?
Well, no, it didn't just happen by happenstance. And certainly Howard University had a lot to do with it. I'm really in a unique position here because I have had lifelong connections to everybody on this panel. And in terms of my career, and I just have to tell this story because I'm like Dr. Crawford in that my father, who admired Gus White, and actually Gus is a distant relative of mine, but he used to tell me when I was in high school, I sure wish you could be like Gus. And I said, I want to know who this Gus guy is, because I'm sick of you telling me all the time that I need to be like Gus. And lo and behold, I wish I could be more like Gus. So, but I mentioned Dr. Richard Grant. He and I grew up together in Gary. Our dads were best friends. And Dr. Grant actually was in the Air Force, as you know, and he was in internal medicine. And he came and visited his family one time when he was on leave, and he spent a week with me in my new practice in Gary in orthopedics. And after that week, he decided to go back to San Antonio and change his residency to orthopedics. And so we have obviously continued that bond. And I actually came and lectured to the Howard residents during his tenure as chief. But after that, he knew about our practice in Gary. He knew about advantages that Howard graduates would have if they came in to our practice, and he knew that we would certainly look out for them. So Dr. Brian Coleman, Dr. Judd Wood, Dr. Alex Miller, and I were all there, along with 7 other orthopedic surgeons during the late 80s, early 90s in Gary. So I would say that Dr. Richard Grant had an awful lot to do with those other orthopedic surgeons joining me in Gary.
Well, thank you. So Dr. Rankin, you were able to, become the president of the academy. That's no simple feat. And the first person of color. How in the world did that happen?
Well, I think it goes back. I started practice with Dr. Epps, and Dr. Epps was involved with the academy. So I got involved in the academy early on. And I think there are a lot of things. Gus has worked early on with the concerned African Americans to bring more attention to leadership roles. I think that played a big part. But I was interested in working with the academy. So I worked a number of years in the academy, doing it on a number of committees. I was on the early on the board of directors. I was later secretary of treasurer. So I think the progression along those lines, but I think the groundwork that had been laid early on by this group actually that started out back in the late 80s, actually, even before that, that sort of laid the groundwork for looking at the opportunities and the fact that we didn't have Blacks in leadership in the academy to the extent that we probably should. So I think that has continued and should continue, but still, as was said earlier, there's a lot of work to do. Let me go back to Sarinthia for just a moment and the bumping heads. Our moderator here could probably mention a few head bumps also. I'm what they call old school and military, so I'm sure my rigidity probably didn't rub some of the young people quite the right way. But in any event, we all got through it. So I think, Bob, in terms of the involvement in our organized aspects of medicine, getting involved and working is really that's how you get the avenues. You have to be involved, and you have to work for a long time.
Well, okay, I'm going to ask a question that Susan Stevens. I'm not going to ask anyone specifically. Anyone can answer this. I'm going to change it just a little bit. But Dr. Stevens asked, how do your families adjust to your profession while you are out there grinding away? Particularly those of you who had to do this, were doing this when there wasn't a whole lot of, may not have been a lot of support at professional support. I'll put it that way. All right, I'll ask Dr. Crawford.
It's not easy. And I had something that was unique that helped me tremendously. And that is my wife.
Yes.
It's unbelievable. I mean, but it wasn't easy. She took the brunt of all the anger and frustration that I had in my workings. And we've been together for a while. But I mean, I can't say any more than that. Did I miss picnics? Yes. Did I miss ball games? Yes. Did I miss? You just miss a lot. But you know what? It wasn't that she derided it. She just made them feel that how much good I was doing for people or something. It was so that was, there is no way to adjust to emergency call. There's no way. And I mean, if you're an 80-year-old kid, your dad has to do that all the time. So I can say that it was a help that I had at home that allowed me to go through. And adjustment is sort of a word that really doesn't count. It's her feeling that she wanted to stay with the program. It was just unbelievable, and that I'm very appreciative of. But that was it for me.
Anyone else?
I can speak to that. I just, early on in my career, I was single. But I decided to come to Chicago to practice because my family is in Chicago. And so, with family to try to, if you need some help doing certain things because you're not home, because you're at work. I was working at a level 1 trauma center at the time, so I was never home. It was easy my parents were happy to do whatever they could to come in, and save the day. And then when I got married, my husband, and we don't have children, but he is just easy. There was never any push and pull, never any conflict. It was always an easy, safe spot to land when I had a rough day. There was never any, you got to go here. It was none of that. And so it just made it an easy transition to be in a married situation and still just do my job without any foolishness. Because, I'm not, I don't do well with that.
I've learned. Dr. White, I have a question for you from I think that there's a transition in the culture of medical school, medical students, residency training, and expectations. And as someone who trained, decades ago, what kind of advice would you have for a young resident now in handling, say, the culture of a residency where they may be one of the only minorities in that residency?
Well, certainly, certainly an important question, and I'll try to give it my best shot, of course. And I had taken some notes, but I can't find where the notes are. But I have a whole list of these answers that I had talked about. But what question was it? What's it parallel to?
Well, I'm saying it's like for young students now, and it may not be clear, but what I'm catching the brunt of is there's a difference in what their expectations are, what the culture is, and what they want, and how they can get what they want out of a residency. And I always felt that as a resident, that never entered my mind. I was just happy to be here, and if I made it, I made it. But I was not going to be, trying to change it. And do you have any, how should I say, advice, either for someone like myself who's like in that middle dealing with young residents, or any advice or story about how it was when you were a resident and how to manage through the culture of that residency?
All right, let's save that question for a minute, but ask the first one again. What advice do I have? And I think my best advice really is, it's not from me, it comes from someone else. One of my mentors I have tremendous respect for as a young man trying to develop my profession, my life, my work, was the chief of surgery at Stanford. And he was a person who was tremendously good at teaching and mentoring and guiding. Mm-hmm. And he had a mantra that he espoused and he encouraged us to follow. And here it is. And I think it's worth sharing. And I think it is helpful. It may not help everyone, but it certainly helped some and it helped me. His name was Victor Richards. He was a professor at Johns Hopkins and then professor at Stanford. Victor Richards, he's not a minority person as you would recognize. And here it is. Do today's work today. Don't worry about yesterday. I agonize over yesterday. Don't be anxious about tomorrow. But the work at hand today, do it. Do it as well as you can and be conscientious about doing it. Mm-hmm. And he said, I have a reasonably good career and I may have survived pretty well. But here it is. Here's what I think has helped me most as I've struggled through these many complexities that we face as a resident, as an attending, as a surgeon. Focus on the day's work and do it every day. I can't really add anything to that. I mean, I think it's valid. I think it's very helpful. So for whatever it's worth, try it.
Yeah. Well, for Dr. Morgan, in that same vein, for medical students who are on this call, if you're accounting, how in the world did you train at Northwestern? How did that happen? Like, how'd you get a spot?
Strategy. So strategy-wise, I did have mentors. And some of my mentors told me that if you had a place you thought you might want to train, see if you can do an elective when you were in medical school. So I actually did my internal medicine residency rotation senior year at Howard. Mm-hmm. I did it at Northwestern. Mm-hmm. Exactly 3 weeks and a day after I got married. Mm-hmm. And so you can imagine how popular that was. But it was an unbelievable experience for me because I met the orthopedic attendings and I met my predecessor in orthopedics, Dr. Clarence Woods, And we just recently had a celebration at the Academy this past year in Chicago. I think we had 13 or 16 African Americans that graduated from Northwestern, and I was the second. Of course, Dr. Suleiman is there and doing all kinds of great things along with others. Dr. Mackel, I see, is on this phone as well as Dr. Hill, but I digress. I think the main thing that I found is that you have to make whatever happen by making connections. And it's not written in a book, but you have to, as Dr. Crawford said, you have to listen and see which way the wind is blowing. You have to understand who makes decisions. And so I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. James Stack, who was the residency director. And he liked me. And even though I was on internal medicine, I spent a lot of time in orthopedics as well. And I would say that relationship served me in good stead because when I matched with when I ranked Northwestern, I matched with Northwestern. And that's really how I became a resident at Northwestern.
Fabulous. Dr. Rankin, in a similar light, on the negative side, what would make you not want to, what would be the negative things about a student's performance or their outlook, or how they would think that would, or the thing that you would tell a student, don't do this. This is definitely not the road to go down. We have a lot of students here. What advice would you give them about what not to do?
Well, let me turn that question around a little bit. As I'm listening to my colleagues, I think we can't understate hard work. I think that's critical. You have to work hard. You have to be dedicated and committed. So I think those things that's old school, but it's important. I think in terms of what not to do, those things are pretty obvious. You want to show up, as Gus just said. You want to do today's work today, and that means getting it done, starting on time and ending on time. So I think there's some of the basic things that we know from early on in life. You have to present your best self at all times.
That's funny, because it took me a while to figure that one out. I had to get pulled aside by Dr. Tony Rankin a few times in order to figure that one out. I was in practice already for about 20 years. I'm going to go. Yeah.
Let me just interrupt to say one other thing. That's one advantage we have in our program at Howard, which isn't in other places. We don't get that second chance. And I think people have to recognize their environments. And if you're in a place you're not going to get a second chance, don't put yourself out in that situation where you need a second chance. That's kind of hard, but it's true. And we take care of our own, but sometimes we're not in situations where we're going to be considered everybody's own.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I'm going to go a little bit off the reservation. Dr. Wells, Larry, you had a question there. I want you to ask it if you wish to do so, or I can ask for you, but I prefer you to ask this question that you put to the panel.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. It's been an amazing event today. My question is just this. We have a tremendous leadership team with the Glenn Society, and our goal is to really provide the resources and the needs for our members. So I really want to know what do our members need at every level of your training and your careers. So we're looking to do just that. I'd love for you to tell me in the chat or send me email. Susan Stevens, Tanya Dixon, Letitia Bilbrew, Eric Carson, the current leaders in our organization. I'm so grateful that they are working so hard. Kevin Purcell and many, many others. So, but let's not be silent. We have a lot of work to do and we will get it done. So my question to you is, what do you need? What's the value add for your careers and your life? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I guess we can put that on the chat. One question for the panel, and again, this is for those, like who are involved with residents now at this point in time. It's been a high attrition of residents from residency. There are residents in orthopedics who are actually quitting and going into other things. And it's hard to just figure out, well, I think COVID has something to do with it. I think there's some cultural changes. And, how can we resolve this type of problem? Or is it a problem? And maybe we just need less, it's just a thing of what's going on now. And so, does anyone have any comment on that?
I'd like to just make one comment, Dr. Wilson.
Yes, sir.
I think that is really the most important issue that we have before us right now,
Yes.
because there is nothing more valuable to the community, and specifically to the African American community, than a spot as an orthopedic resident. We have suffered significantly from the loss of 4 residents per year from Drew. We have benefited from the number of residents who have graduated from Howard, and God forbid we lose that opportunity. And so that's in the front door. And then in the back door, we have got to stop losing residents or losing physicians. Some people are just done with medicine, not only residency. And it may be because it wasn't exactly clear what the rules were when people went in, and orthopedics can sort of overwhelm a lot of medical students. But it's really important, I think, that we have our orthopedic surgeons seek as many faculty positions as possible, so they can be like all of you who have been on this call, who can constantly even predict when there might be something that could happen, and to stand instead, in the stead of individuals who are struggling. And it's usually not that they don't have the ability, of course, but it's just that these encounters and these other issues continue to occur. But I think the more brown faces and black faces that they see in their everyday work, that is what's going to make a difference. It's a problem, and we all have to focus upon it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. George Russell had a question. Dr. Russell asked, what advice does the panel have for medical students to get in front of key influences in orthopedics? People like, I have no idea why he put my name in it. People like Bob Wilson, who are busy with family teaching practice, etc. So how does a student get in front of you and get to talk to you? How does that work out, Dr. Crawford?
I look at industry as possibly the facet that an individual has. It shows me they're ready to work and get the job done. Mm-hmm. And I've used, and I use this with my kids for years, and that's a mid-complex: motivation, in industry, integrity, and desire. But if a kid can show me industry, and industry is not having, well, I'm sorry I won't be able to see this, but I think I've got a class in a half an hour. You hear me out. I think I've got a class. The kids are a little bit different today. And my issue has been, industry, that will answer your question. That to me is everything. I don't think anyone has ever denied someone who is a hard worker. I mean, you can have brilliance, you can have motivation, you can have all of those things. But if you show industry, and it's palpable, you can see it and feel it. Kids are different today. They have different goals, different aspirations, different directions, and you have to try to get with them. And it's not easy. But I would say that as far as I'm concerned, if one can show me industry specifically with integrity, I think that's the way to get in front of anyone you need to be in front of.
Yes, sir. Dr. White, I meant to ask you this earlier. When, as a resident. I read a number of your research work, read a lot of that, and we learned a lot from about Dr. White from his research. What got you interested in doing research in the first place?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that one, as I mentioned, I did major in psychology at Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you weren't a graduate student or you weren't doing a major research project, a lot of the courses sort of evolved around trying to identify problems, trying to create meaningful questions that you might write a research grant around. And I just came to respect and recognize that the major way that we can make progress in the world, in the communities, in the institutions, is to try to seek new knowledge. In fact, just as I've listened previously to some of the very challenging questions that this group has been addressing and thinking about, well, what can we do about, residency failure and so forth. And yes. I'm thinking, well, one of the things that we can do and will be very important for us to do is to do some research on why are people really dropping out? What can we find out? How much of it is bias? How much of it is misdirection, a lack of direction, interest? I'm sure it's some mixture of all these things, but we say, what's the worst, the most white profession? Well, it's orthopedics, so people say. Well, okay, do we really know that? Do we know the number of applicants versus the number of acceptances in each of the specialties? Wouldn't that be nice to know? Maybe orthopedics is the worst, maybe it isn't. But whether it is or it isn't, what can we do to understand, to change that? It's not acceptable. It's not good for anyone, not good for the society, not good for the patients, not good for the residents, not even good for the attendings who have to find new residents and have to try to train and help to rehabilitate and redirect the ones that we have. So my short answer is well-conceived, well-executed research to get some answers to direct us. And we want to do the humane thing. We want to do the right thing, and everybody deserves to be treated in a humane fashion. And that's a no-brainer. I mean, we have to accept that. And the leadership in all of these educational institutions and hospitals and residency programs, hopefully will be publicly committed to trying to address some of these very important issues.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Parker, question for you. Do you have any advice for the ladies who want to go into orthopedic surgery? There's, I think what's really, really good, at least in the last few years, is there are a lot more, I won't say there's more women interested. I think there's more women getting spots. I think that's good for orthopedics, but what advice would you give them in applying and trying to get a spot, and then for the future in their jobs?
Well, first of all, I think Dr. Rankin said it, and Dr. White, in terms of just working hard. I mean, you have to work hard. You have to, it's not easy. So a lot of times with this, social media and things get all fluffed up and what have you, but it's not fluffy, it's hard. And so I think recognizing as you go into it that it's difficult and there will be some challenges and people will challenge you, but I think you have to understand who you are and not allow someone to make you feel that you're lesser than who you are. So you have to be very self-aware. You need to be aware when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, when you're not meeting the grade. But you also need to be aware when you are. And if somebody is challenging you that you're not, you need to be able to speak up for yourself if necessary and say, hey, I'm here to learn, teach me. And not tuck your tail and go away and feel like, oh, I shouldn't be here. Allow somebody to think that you are, are not there. I think that the fortitude to persevere through not just residency, but even practice, because practice is hard. Especially you'll find yourself in spaces where you're the only one, the first one, and everyone's looking at you. And it's not easy. It's a challenge kind of every day. So whatever it is that allows you to know for a certainty that you're supposed to do what you're supposed to be doing and not allow others to influence that in a negative way. But I think that starts with first hard work. Because if you work hard, you know, you can't move that. And so I think that that's the starting point, to just know that you have to work hard, and you have to consistently work hard, like every day, not like Tuesday, but 7 days.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Purcell, you know, we've been going for a little more than an hour. I'm just going to ask one more question, unless you think I should open it up or ask other things. And I wanted to ask Dr. Morgan about the Cobb Cobb Institute, and just discuss that in the NMA, and it's the history of that Montague Cobb.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the question, Dr. Purcell. I'll try to be very brief on that. And I've thought about this a lot, because my question is really to myself: do organizations become obsolete? Is there a lifetime or lifespan for organizations? And so I would hope not. Certainly the National Medical Association is 127 years old, having been founded in 1895. And it is really the core of all of the other organizations that we have in subspecialties, including the orthopedic section. It was the opportunity for all of us to give papers when we were young and to have them critiqued. And that's one part of our program with the Gladden Society that I think we need to make sure is continued. That we have that opportunity, and we have the opportunity for young scholars to provide their work. The Cobb Institute was launched 18 years ago, and really the brains behind the Cobb Institute is Cato Lorenzen, and he asked me to be the executive director interim in 2005. And so I'm still there as an interim. It's been quite a interesting ride, but I've seen the intersection between the Gladden Society and the Cobb Institute because of my work in both, and the opportunities to really develop orthopedic surgeons who are also researchers and who have interest in health disparities research. And so that's really the focus that I see, and the connection that I see right now between what we're doing in the Gladden Society, what's possible with the Cobb Institute. And finally, Dr. W. Montague Cobb, I think I'm probably the only one on the phone who was a student of Dr. Cobb. There may be one other person, but in 1965, he was my anatomy professor. Little did I know he was involved with Medicaid, Medicare, the Civil Rights Act, president of the NAACP, editor of the Journal of the NMA, and president of NMA, all at the same time. He was teaching us anatomy in medical school. So it gives me just a stimulus to know that I've had people like Dr. Cobb and Dr. Epps and others who have molded my career.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I think let's take 2 more questions, and I think let's close it out after that.
All right. Are there any questions from, Kevin, do you have a question?
Wait, this is Susan Stevens, and I hate to interrupt, but that's you. And I want the speakers to talk about how wonderful and important JRGOS was to them and is to them. And I just want them to talk about Gladden.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I think talk about the early history. That's good.
Well, I will start with Dr. Rankin, just telling you a little bit about about Gladden. Dr. Gladden was. I'll briefly say, as a young orthopedic surgeon, I was in practice, and my mother-in-law's aunt was sick in DC, and she was sort of going in and out of consciousness. And I walk in to see my Aunt Chris, and I say, "Aunt Chris, how you doing?" And she said, "Bobby, Bobby." And she said, "Bobby Gladden, how you doing?" I said, I'm not Bobby Gladden. This is Bobby Wilson." But it was, I said, wow, I didn't know she knew who that person was, or of that person. And I didn't realize, oh, she's a Washingtonian. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. But I think Dr. Rankin and then
Yes.
Dr. White.
Well, Dr. J. Robert Gladden was the first board certified African-American orthopedic surgeon for which our society is named. The organization, as we noted, and the history is on the website, but at one of our NMA meetings back in the late 80s, Dr. Gus White was the speaker for that meeting, and he talked about the importance, and he and Dr. Tim Stevens, Dr. Susan Stevens' dad, said that we needed to organize ourselves more effectively for more effective leadership within the organization. And Dr. Gus White took the ball at that point and really moved things along. Now, prior to that, Dr. Charles Epps at the earlier academy meetings, because many of the other orthopedic surgeons at the meetings had various alumni meetings that they attended, and because a few Black orthopedic surgeons were from different places, Dr. Epps organized a luncheon that was initially termed the Howard Meharry Luncheon. And from that, the organization grew, and as the rest they say is history. But that was the early beginning. And Dr. Gus White, Dr. Alvin Crawford, and Dr. Randy Morgan, Dr. Richard Grant, and many others whose names are on our history, helped to bring the organization to where it is today. And I'm happy to say that the young people today are moving forward with the ideas that we had. And I think the organization means a lot. It's very important that we keep it going.
I'll include Dr. Tim Stevens. Dr. White, I remember how it developed as an organization sponsored by the Academy. And so how did that happen?
Yes, well, we wanted to have the cooperation and the support and anticipated not having and hoping not to have pushback or opposition. And I think we therefore, I don't know exactly when, but somewhere along the way, we said it's a multicultural society. You know, it has the goal of having equitable care for all of our patients, but it is not just for African-American patients. I think that was one thing. But I believe that we are so fortunate to have had this nodal point in history where people stepped up to the plate. I mean, it was not difficult to get this organization started because people stepped up and said, well, I can do this. You can use my credit card to make some of the initial calls. And I was one of my friends in life and teachers is Alvin Poussant, who's a psychiatrist at Yale, again, my interest in psychology, but he talks about the colonialized mentality. Francis Fanon, the distinguished psychiatry in the revolution, talked about a colonialized mentality, which is if you happen to be the victim or you happen to be a person who grows up in and becomes psychologically knowledgeable in a given society that does not respect you or your people, then you have a bit of a hurdle to overcome to respect your own people. And I think in my experience outside of orthopedics, outside of this conversation, I've been aware that somehow, we were not as generous in being able to give up praise, respect, and adulation, and follow people of our own ethnicity. And Frantz Fanon talked about the colonialized mentality. And I thought that this was beautifully demonstrated by us, the people who are here now, the people who were with us then, and the people who are going to be with us going forward. We're here, we're not having trouble accrediting one another here tonight. We've said Joe did this, Sam did that, and I worked on this, and that represents the absence, represents us shedding the idea of our colonializing mentality and being able to cooperate and work forward. The Gladden Society provided that vehicle. People stepped up to the plate. Yeah, sure, there were only one, we started the meetings and so forth, but there had to be a communal African-American buy-in, which occurred. And here we are today, and I think we have a great future going forward. And I think that same shedding of that colonialized mentality will carry us forward even more than more of a distance that we've already come. And I'd say one other thing, please bear with me, I'm sorry, but I picked up from our meetings a wonderful reality. To me, it was a wonderful reality. And that was one of our participants said, look, we're talking about survival. Yeah, we want to survive. Of course, we want to survive going forward. But we don't want to just survive. We want to thrive. And our goal should be we as people are capable of, have the resources to do, but need to have also the agenda and aspire to surviving, yes, but really we want to transcend, we want to thrive going forward.
Well, thank you, thank you very much, Dr. White. And on that note, we'll close it. Thank you. This has been an incredible evening for me. I just want to thank the panel. I want to thank Kevin Purcell. I want to thank all those who have been involved with this. I want to thank my wife for keeping my kids quiet. This has just been amazing and much appreciated. Kevin, back to you.
Yeah, so on behalf of the Gladden Society social media team and everyone involved, I'd like to say thank you all for coming out tonight. My favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he says, we stand on the shoulder of giants. And I could say that we all stand on the shoulders of all of our panelists and our moderator tonight. So thank you all for all that you've done, for all that you've provided, and for all of those that you have taught. Have a great night. And enjoy the rest of your Black History Month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Bob.
Thank you.
Good night.
Peace and love. Peace and love.